All right. I want to welcome everyone back to yet another episode of the Shadows podcast. It's our first one for the month of December as we're starting to wind down the year. Just to let all of our listeners know, our very last episode of the month is going to be a year interview. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of behind the scenes stuff that's happened during a lot of these interviews, setting things up, putting the show together. We'll also talk a lot about San Antonio. I really haven't had an opportunity to talk about San Antonio, where I was part of the Podcaster Influencer Conference as part of the Air Force Sergeants Association annual conference that they have each year in August. So some really cool stuff that we're going to talk about. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. And if you haven't already done so, head over to our YouTube channel. They got these new handles on YouTube. We were able to snag at The Shadows Podcast. So make sure you head over there, like, subscribe, comment, hit the notifications, and definitely give us some love here on the show. But today, I am very excited to have with us a guest, Dr. Omar Reda. I'm going to call him Omar on here. He is a world-renowned Harvard-trained trauma expert, author of several books, including his most recent book, The Wounded Healer, The Pain and Joy of Caregiving. He's the founder of Untangled, a healing initiative that aims to break the cycle of trauma-related dysfunctions through connection, support, education, empowerment, and mastery of healthy coping skills. I was having a tough time reading there for a minute. But welcome to the Shadows Podcast.
Thank you, Trev. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a pleasure of mine to have you on here. I was reading a little bit about you prior to recording, and something that caught my eye was a journey of pain and joy, suffering and hope. And here on the Shadows, I talk about turning tragedies and trials into triumphs and tribulation, just basically overcoming any sort of obstacles that are put in front of us. And I think you epitomize that. And I think this is really cool to have you here on the Shadows. So first, let our listeners know where you currently recording at.
Thank you. And really, it's a pleasure to be on your show. And I am just outside Denver, Colorado today.
Okay. We have a pretty heavy Colorado audience. We have a lot of guests who've been on here from the Denver, Colorado Springs area. What's the weather like there right now?
Not bad, really. I mean, we were expecting more snow, but it haven't been that heavy this season.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely one of the places I'm hoping I may end up next year when it's time for me to pack things up and move. Well, first, just to get our listeners going here, we're going to take things a little bit different approach here on this episode because you have so much to go over. It was interesting when I was reading the bio about you, and you actually start off kind of different than what most people do. You were talking about generational trauma that your parents went through in your family before you were even born. So why was that such an important piece to set the stage before being born in 1973?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have noticed that if we don't really acknowledge our old wounds and our generational trauma, sometimes it will manifest in different ways, especially when it comes to relationships. So maybe when I hear a story from one client, or when I see, something that will activate a memory, maybe a memory that did not even happen to me. Maybe it happened to my father or somebody from my ancestors. I have seen that with my clients. I have seen it with my community members, seen it with my own family. So it was very important for me to acknowledge that my mom and dad are very important part of my story, and their story can actually maybe be a reason for me to either hinder or speed my own healing.
Okay. And we're going to get into some of the stuff that they went through. And I mean, a lot of respect for some of the things that your parents had to go through. Talk to us about your family dynamics. Libya, 1973, middle of 12 children. What was that like?
It was very interesting. I mean, I am number 6 out of 12, and I lost one brother and one sister. So right now I am number 5 out of 10 living siblings. But I mean, mom and dad were very emotionally available, which I'm very, very grateful for. Many times we work, long hours, and maybe we work 2 jobs, and we try to provide materialistically for our children. And we forget that mainly they are asking for their emotional needs to be fulfilled. So in a way, many people, especially somebody from my background, coming from the refugee experience might lose the American dream chasing it. I will be working very hard and I forget my own family in the process. So being a part of a big family was a very empowering experience because we are very close family. Unfortunately, when the war in Libya, my home country, happened in 2011, that caused lots of dysfunction, even in family relations, because some of my siblings, they chose different ideologies and they fought for different cause, unfortunately. And when my mom died in 2016, the whole family unit was almost destroyed. So I had to step in and try to do some healing within my own family.
What early memories do you have growing up? And I'm interested from a culture standpoint because, in the States, growing up, it's watching cartoons, going out, playing outside, playing basketball, football with your friends. What was an average day like with your family?
I think we were very lucky to predate the internet and the social media. So exactly
Yeah.
like you, I was spending times with my, children, my neighbors and my cousins, and we even spent the night at a neighbor house. It was never something we were scared of, and just playing in the streets and just doing lots of physical activities and family bonding was very, very important. The culture and the religion were part of my upbringing, and things were really going very gently until my sister died when I was only 6 years old, and she died when she was 14. She died of brain cancer, and that started my whole trauma story and led to many unfortunate things that impacted family dynamics.
Yeah, and my condolences. I mean, you mentioned uh, losing a sibling when you were 3, losing one when you were 6. I lost a sister as well. I was 16 when I lost my sister. She was
Mm,
14
mm.
also. And you mentioned, well, she was, is this correct? She was blind and then she died of cancer. Is that what it was?
Yeah, the reason for her blindness, the brain cancer. So it started as losing her eyesight first.
Mm. And then tell the story about the report card. I'm afraid I'm going to get a little teary eyed hearing it, but you said there wasn't a dry eye in the room.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so I was very young, I remember, but I really vividly remember when her teachers came to pay condolences for her loss, and they brought the yearly report card, and she have aced all of her classes, even though she was blind, and she was number one of her class. She was very hard worker, and she was extremely beautiful, and I think she was an angel. That's why she did not last long on this earth.
And what was the men? Do you remember? I know you said you were 6, but do you remember like how your parents handled that? What their mentality was after? I mean, I couldn't imagine losing 2 kids.
Yeah, I mean, my mom was for sure heartbroken, and coming from the culture I come from, my father tried to not show emotions. Unfortunately, there is lots of stigma and taboo about men expressing feelings, so it was very difficult. I think he was extremely heartbroken, and he did not have the space to express his grief and sorrow. That's why, as a father, I try to be a role model for my 3 daughters and tell them that there is nothing wrong about talking about our feelings.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That it's almost, I know from maybe past 2 generations or so, it's almost a badge of honor to say like, oh, he passed away, but you never saw him cry. Where I
Mm.
think more that's a weakness because you're struggling with so many things that you're not expressing. Um, how do you think we change that view in society?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that real men cry. There is nothing that's not a stigma, not sign of weakness, not sign of personality or weak faith, and it's not a reason to judge someone if they are showing genuine human, emotions, especially when you lose a loved one. So I think not only through education, I'm a big fan of education in order to combat the stigma. But I have noticed most of these taboo issues, if we do connection, so education and the human connection, I think, are the way to heal all of our wounds. Most of our wounds happen because of relationship rupture. Most of our healing when happen when we repair these ruptures.
Now, next thing I want to ask you about is, I mean, you went from 3 years old losing a family member, 6 years old losing a family member, and then 11 years old, you're nearly kidnapped. So, what do you remember about that experience?
Yeah, that one, and remember the death of my brother and sister made me really want to become a physician, and this is why I chose the field of medicine. And I actually wanted to be a brain surgeon, but that's another story. Every time I go to the operating room, I end up on the floor unconscious. So when you faint multiple times, you're not a good brain surgeon, I think. But I was walking back from school, coming home, and this car was behind me, and this guy pretended to ask for directions. And really, in that time in Libya, people did not warn you that adults can hurt children. So it was a normal thing for adults to ask children and stop by and even offer you a lift and stuff like that. So I went to the car and I found him to be naked from the waist down, and he tried to grab me and sexually assault me. So I was very lucky that I was able to run away and hide, and that made me very passionate about trying to protect children from trauma, especially sexual trauma.
And how did your parents react to that?
They never knew.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I only talked about it in the book that was just published in March
Wow.
2022.
So what did that do for your psyche at that point? I mean, you're not expressing it to anybody. You're almost like keeping that bottled in. How did that affect you like out and about?
Yeah, it will make you hyper vigilant, and it make you doubt your own core beliefs that wow, the world maybe is not a safe place, and maybe not every adult should be trusted with children. So it was a little confusing to my psyche, and especially you're only 11-year-old. But I think that ignited lots of passion in me to be a cause of healing for children.
Yeah, and one thing that I really admire about your story is even through tragedies or I mean through something a scary situation like that, it almost sparks something in you to do better. And some of those aspirations you mentioned, brain surgeon was one, which you said you kept passing out. Um, what what was your plan B if medical school didn't work out for you?
To be honest, there was no plan B. It has to be medical school. And I think from day one, it was psychiatry. I
Yeah.
mean, I was working as an emergency room physician because that was the most immediate need in the country. It's very different than the American, healthcare system. So when you finish your medical school, you will be assigned to the most needed area.
Mm.
At the time, it was emergency room. So even in the ER, I was taking care of people, invisible wounds, if you like, talking about their psychosocial needs and their trauma story, holding hands with them and spending lots of time with them, which not usually something that you do in the emergency room. So I knew from day one that psychiatry is my cup of tea, but there is lots of stigma against mental health in the culture. So I ended up hiding that passion until I came to the United States and started my residency in the University of Tennessee.
And you ended up University of Tennessee, Memphis. You finished up there. You went to Harvard, a program for refugee trauma, started working in disaster relief, humanitarian work. I like what you said. I'm not a heart surgeon, but mending broken hearts is my calling. Talk to us about the importance of those invisible wounds that we walk around with.
Yeah, I mean, even like in 1999, I was forced to run away from Libya and actually cross the Mediterranean Sea on a boat to seek asylum in the United Kingdom. And the immigration judge, he said, Omar, I have to deny your case for asylum because I cannot see any visible wounds on your body. And I told him, you cannot see the invisible scars on my mind and my heart and my soul. So this is what we do. We discriminate against the psychosocial suffering because most of the visible suffering is physical. So if you are bleeding from a physical wound trip, people will rush you to the emergency room. They will come and take care of you. If you are emotionally bleeding, many people will ask you to suck it up and don't share it because it's going to be a source for stigma. And even in my culture, unfortunately, if you are a female, people might not even come and ask for you to marry you and stuff like, yeah, if you have a mental illness. So, and most of what we go through is not really a mental illness, not a mental disorder. It's rather a moral distress. We have symptoms, we don't have diseases, and we have normal reaction to abnormal situation. A human suffering is abnormal. The genuine and authentic feelings that we have, there is nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear too. About people expressing themselves. What what do you think of the whole, I mean, like mental health's kind of become like a buzzword as of late. But where do you think the paradigm shift has been recently to where mental health is being brought more to the forefront?
I think number of things. I mean, as we know, the racial justice, causes that are very prevalent in our country. At the same time, I think the global pandemic was extremely ugly, and it just removed
Mm,
a huge band-aid from very dysfunctional healthcare system. And when we talk about the caregiving, I'm not only talking about doctors and nurses, even teachers and parents and community and faith leaders, everybody, first responders, people on the front lines, we are all wounded healers. We are all caregivers. So I have noticed two things. One is there is a little bit more reception of this discussion. So people are talking about their needs and asserting their boundaries and taking care of the burnout and focusing on healing and wellness. At the same time, something I'm very worried about, there are more needs than the available resources.
mm.
So once people start to talk and you offer them services, you get overwhelmed very quickly because there are many, many wounds that will keep all of us in business, unfortunately.
Yeah, I could imagine if everybody had an outlet to just express like the internal hurt that they go through throughout their lives, and it ends up just getting suppressed by most people, and that's it's not necessarily the healthiest thing. So you're right, there would definitely be an overwhelming amount of people that would need that help. But I still want to talk a little bit about some of your story because I mean there's just so much to go through here. 1998, you were visiting a friend who was recovering from oral surgery. What in the world transpired there between 4 cars and 16 guns?
Yeah, I mean, Libya was very, tightly controlled by the army, I would say, and there was almost a, a civil movement to change the regime, but there was another movement that was an armed movement that was trying to tackle the Gaddafi regime and take him out of power. And looks like the neighbor of my friend that I was visiting was involved in the armed conflict. And the minute we parked our car in front of the door of my friend, all of these cars came and these men with all kinds of guns. And they said, "What are you doing here?" I'm just visiting a friend. And they said, "You are at the wrong place at the wrong time. And you are very lucky that we're not going to shoot at you." And after they, you know, ex- you know, went and checked our ID and made sure that our story is correct, they let us go. But you can really be killed or you can go to jail for things that you are just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, wrong place at wrong time. And what was it like just from educating myself here, listening to your story, day in and day out during that time period?
I mean, to be honest, as long as you don't talk about politics and you don't involve yourself in, trying to change the regime, most people were just going with the flow. So if you want to keep just going to your job and coming back home and just stay silent, don't express any mention of freedom or your rights or anything like that. Libya was really under lots of, you know, I would say military scrutiny at the time, and it was very, very powerful regime. So when the war happened in 2011 and Gaddafi was quickly removed from power, it was very confusing, to be honest, to many Libyans because they didn't think he will go that quickly. And unfortunately, the country fell into very failed state and civil war. And one Gaddafi was replaced by hundreds of militias, unfortunately.
You mentioned don't mention anything politics, but that's what we call Twitter here, where everyone throws their opinions on there. It's crazy to see everybody's a expert come political season. Actually, the 4 years in between. You left your country in 1999. You were what, 26 years old when you left?
Exactly.
Yeah, and you mentioned you went to England first, and then this is a really interesting part of your story. You come to the US 5 months after September 11th, correct?
Yes.
How was that as a young Arab Muslim man arriving in the state? I couldn't even imagine the discrimination, the profiling, you know, what you will. What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, I mean, remember when the immigration judge told me I need to dismiss your case? I was about to be deported back to Libya, and God intervened, and I met my wife who was from Colorado, and she applied for a fiance visa for me. So that was approved only in February of 2002. So she told me all beautiful things about the United States, and unfortunately, the United States was really uh, struggling with fresh wounds in
Yeah.
2002. So I was an easy target. I mean, I was clearly Arab and Muslim, and I was very proud of my culture and religion. And I was called all kinds of names. People will tell you, "How's Osama doing?" and "Where is your camel?" and "Go back home," and all of these things that are very difficult to hear when you are coming to achieve the American dream. But that made me very passionate about intercultural, interfaith dialogue. And I'm not going to buy into hate. I'm going to treat hate with love.
Yeah. Yeah. And once again, I just love how you take something that's, I mean, most people would look at it as adversity, and you're just like, I'm learning from this and I'm going to move on from it and be better. So kudos to you for definitely doing that, because a lot of people would be resentful and angry and bitter. Um, but also in actually, where'd you meet your wife? How'd y'all meet?
Yeah, we met in Scotland.
Really?
So, yeah,
We're out in
Ed
Scotland.
Edinburgh.
Okay, I love it there.
Yeah, it is a really, really one of the best places I ever been to.
Yeah, really, really nice spot. Yep. I like Scotland, the rolling hills. So 2009, y'all were delivering your daughter, and you were told that she'll never make it. What was that
Mm.
experience like, and how did you learn from that? How did you grow from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the most difficult experience for a father when they tell you your child is quote unquote imperfect, and maybe this pregnancy needs to be terminated. And we decided absolutely not. We're going to keep our child, going to love our child regardless. And they told us 100% chance she's going to have Down syndrome and all of these congenital abnormalities. And she came out a perfect and a beautiful child. And of course, every child is beautiful and perfect in their own way. But, you know, that made me know that there is something bigger than the human experience. And there was another physician in the room. The physician who delivered the news was one, but God was the other physician, and he had his own decision then.
Nice, nice, and that's, I mean, just keeps adding here to the story. Then you lost your mother in 2016. Said she was your best friend, and what do you remember? Because I like to celebrate people on here. Your mother. What's that one memory you look back at and really stands out most to you?
Yeah, and I talk about that memory, and it's the reason I continue the work that I do. I actually wrote about it in the book, The Wounded Healer. But really, every time I see my mom, she is visiting someone, either a family of somebody who just died, or a family of somebody who's in the hospital sick, or she goes to the hospital and visit these random people, total strangers. And I am like, Mom, you don't know them. And she's like, Omar, I know that they are in pain. And if I just show up, if I bear witness, if I am there for them, maybe I can take away some of their pain and distress. And she always told me, please be a source of joy and delight, never a source of pain and distress. So I do everything that I do right now to try to keep her memory and legacy alive.
Some of those things that I want to ask you about that you're doing to keep her memory and legacy alive, which you're doing some incredible stuff. Talk to us about the Wounded Healer, caring for caregivers.
Yeah, the wounded healer. I mean, even though it was an idea before the pandemic, but really during the pandemic, many of my colleagues, they were walking away from the field of medicine or nursing, and some of them struggling with burnout, and some of them are numbing their moral injury using substance. Unfortunately, some of them died of suicide, and I couldn't take it anymore. I am like writing about it. I'm speaking to the leadership, and eventually I decided to turn it into a book, and just the book try to celebrate the memory of those who passed, and hopefully try to reduce or prevent the burnout from others who are going through the same. And maybe it will be one tool in a toolkit that we can provide, so people can maybe use better, healthy, and safe coping skills to deal with their moral injury.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too, was about the pandemic. Like, how did the pandemic impact you? But it seems like you got pen to paper whenever that happened. What about untangled, healing trauma in a family context?
And this is what I want to go back to, a point that you mentioned. Many fathers, especially, they don't talk about what happened to them. And I think they will pass their trauma story to their children that way. And we're going to continue a very dysfunctional and toxic cycle. Some fathers might come home from work, and because of burnout, they will either lash out, and the easy target is your loved ones, or you're going to shut down, and the easy target is your loved ones. So our children, our spouses, they are walking on eggshells around us. So I refuse to believe this is the status quo. I refuse to make this the norm in my home. And I think a cycle needs to be broken, and the cycle needs to stop with me. Um, my children should not inherit a distorted trauma story. So I'm a big believer in giving people voice and platform and safe spaces. And this is how Untangled was born. Just through providing safe spaces, we give people the education to tackle the stigma. We give them coping skills through training, and we give them culturally aware resources and services if they need it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that kind of sparked something in me. One thing that I've noticed a lot, whether it's from talking to people on here or just talking to students throughout my time teaching, is especially people who had parents who served like in Vietnam around that time. Maybe it was World War II or Vietnam. They never really, some of them don't even know what their parents did in war. Their fathers, they were like, they served, but they never talked about it. I never heard anything. And a lot of times with that, as you mentioned, comes anger, comes a hostile household, because of all that buildup that they have. And then that's passed down to the next generation where you grow up and all you know is fighting with everyone at the house and arguing with everyone and coming home and not talking about your work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really glad to see, Untangled and what you're doing with that, because that is, like you said, a cycle that needs to really be broken if we're not aware of it. What about children in war? The power of hope in a traumatized world.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just go briefly to the point that you mentioned, which is, I think, especially as fathers, I know we're talking to moms and dads. I have noticed many fathers don't really share their story, and many children, they want to know more about their dad,
Yeah.
and that's why I think it's really important that never die before you tell your story, and it will be wonderful if you tell it to your children. Of course, you're not going to share all of the graphic details of what happened to you. At the same time, most likely sharing your story will give them avenue and the safety to share their own. So if every time they want to talk to us, we dismiss them and we don't provide a safe space, they will find that safe space with somebody else. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I have noticed many children that use social media and their peers rather than their parents when they go through a difficult time. And we are losing many youth trip to suicide and self-injury and eating disorders, and that's a cycle I really want to break. And with the children of war and children coming from refugee camps, I try to focus on resilience. I try to focus on their coping skills. They have survived the worst of the war before they met me. So I am there just to bear witness. I try to provide play and art activities. I try to remind them of how strong they are, and try to build with them, not for them, things from their culture and their religion that they can lean on. try to improve any relationship issues with their parents, and try to expand their support network. So maybe they can use their places of worship, their schools, their social workers, their school counselors, all of these as resources. And no
Mm-hmm.
child should feel that they are alone. No human should feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Do you do a lot of this virtual or do you travel a lot?
I love travel, and the pandemic has made that difficult, but I'm very grateful that back to in-person sessions. Of course, it's very difficult to travel to refugee camps, and I used to do that every year. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's not easy now with the children going to school and going to college. And yeah, if you work a full-time job, it would be very difficult for you to secure the time off that you need to go to a refugee camp. But I am a big believer that you don't have to go overseas to bring healing.
Mm.
Healing can start from home. Your own family, your own small community needs lots of healing.
As you mentioned, using dialogue as a healing tool. Why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, I have noticed not only in a family context, which I'm very, very proud that me and my three daughters, we built the daughter-father bonding project YouTube channel. So we have 60 videos on YouTube how fathers and their daughters especially can communicate. But also I have noticed that it's very important to use dialogue with people who might have different ideology, who fought for different cause. We used it in Libya with people who fought for and against Mr. Gaddafi. We used it with the Syrian refugees fighting for and against Mr. Assad. And I think it will be very beautiful if we also use it with the people coming from Iraq and Afghanistan, working with the refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan here in the country. I think both sides need lots of healing. And if they find just common grounds and focus on shared humanity, we can really reach healing that way.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear more about this YouTube channel. So tell us about YouTube channel, about your books, basically any and everything that you're working on.
Thank you. I mean, the YouTube channel was the daughter-father bonding project, and 60 videos on how to just bring back some of the tools needed to heal the family relations, like safe touch and eye contact and smiling, spending quality time with your children. And even I engage with them even in difficult conversations that many fathers don't talk with their daughters about. I think very, very important the role of a father and the life of a child, especially in the life of their um, girls, very, very important. And the other projects I'm working with, lots of refugee building capacity, working with organizations, lots of work with the wounded healers. So we build retreats and training of trainers, and we work on the Islamic psychology, trying to just make sure that every culture, every religion has to offer. There is no one size that fits all.
Mhm.
Healing can happen in different ways, and I think if we just welcome every body into the table, we will enrich rather than alienate, because we have lots of beauty to offer one another. And a trip, if I dismiss you because you look different or you practice differently, I'm going to miss out on all of the beautiful things you can bring to my life. So that's a big belief of mine. And all of these are included in mainly my website, which is dromarreda.com, DROMARREDA.com. You can find the Untangled model there. You can find the Wounded Healer model there. All of the books that I published, all of the trainings that I offer. So I would love to have a conversation about what else we can do, because I think the trauma story seems to be always one step ahead of us. We are playing catch up. And as I told you, I mean, my dream is to lose my job as a trauma expert. That means there is no more trauma in the world. And I would love that. I would be happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll have the all of the links that you just mentioned will be in the episode description. So folks, if you click on there, you'll be able to take you straight to the YouTube channel and to the website. And my last question for you here, 50 years from now, what is your legacy going to be when people mention your name?
Well, I really want one thing. Just I was part of making the world a more safe space. So the world many times is not safe, but our interpersonal relationships, our small world can be safe. And this is a choice that you and me can make. Between me and Trip, we have the choice. We make the conscious decision to either hate one another or love each other. We can either push one another back and stay in our or small corner, or we can build a bridge. So if I can be part of a bridge building, if I can be part of a solution focused, if I can leave my children a little more safer, then I will be a very proud father.
Yeah. And I love all the work that you're doing and the fact that you were transparent, vulnerable, open about your story, everything that you've been through. Folks, definitely head over. Like I said, click on the links, give him some support, check it out. Go check out the models that he has on the website. Got some really good stuff. Very good looking website too. Liked it a lot.
Thank you.
Go check them out. Awesome, awesome stuff. And I can't thank you enough for joining us here this week on The Shadows. What final comment do you have for our listeners out there?
I really appreciate everybody who's engaged in this cause, who believes in breaking the cycle. And if anything that I say today was activating or triggering, I really want you to practice lots of self-compassion, uh, love yourself and love your family. And I'm very grateful for people like you, Trip, who give us these spaces and these platforms so we can be source of healing for others.
Well, it's guests like you that make this show keep going week after week. So I appreciate all that you're doing, all the amazing work. Folks, like I said, one more time, click on the links, go check them out. Incredible stuff. Sir, thank you very much for taking time to be here today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, one more time, head over, check out our YouTube channel at The Shadows Podcast. Also, head over, check out Instagram, Facebook accounts as well. If you like what we're doing here to help out with all those algorithms, definitely go leave us a 5-star review. You can leave one on the website, or you can leave one on any of your favorite podcast platforms. But we definitely appreciate the love and support as we have just gone over the 100th episode. We are heading towards 106, which is going to be our year interview, last episode of the year, where, like I said, we're going to talk all about what happened scheduling some of these guests. After we hit record, this seems like when some of the best stuff happens is before, after the record, and then also everything that happened at the conference in San Antonio this past August. But folks, we will see you next week on another episode of The Shadows Podcast.